credit where credit's due. Sussan Ley has given the Coalition an energy and emissions policy that could not be more different than Labor's.
We will prioritise affordable energy for households and businesses, and this is just so important. I look at the sort of world I want my grandchildren to inherit, and I don't want it to be in Australia with a lower standard of living than we have today. That's not fair on the next generations.
That was a press conference on Sunday where the Liberal Party position arrived at last week was then debated with the National Party for a uniform coalition position. And Ley hit the road today to get out there and campaign to try and persuade voters that running our power supply to reduce emissions rather than delivering affordable and reliable power is simply mad.
Australians deserve affordable energy and responsible emissions reduction. And the Coalition knows that you can have both, but we will prioritise affordable energy. If energy is unaffordable, then everything is unaffordable.
Now, Sussan Ley, good on her. She's taken the advice of lots of her colleagues, like Andrew Hastie and Jacinta Price, who gave it to her pretty publicly. But she's also taken the advice of other colleagues like Angus Taylor, who has been at this issue privately, and advice from people like me and many others who have given her our views as well on net zero. And by dumping it, she's gone against the so-called moderates, the faction inside the Coalition who gave her the numbers to win the leadership. Now, to do that takes courage. It takes real moral courage. So having done what the majority of her colleagues were demanding that she do to dump net zero, and having clearly persuaded herself that dumping net zero was the right and necessary thing to do, well, the opposition leader deserves support. Demanding that leaders show leadership, then rejecting them when they do, well, that would be a real failure of character. So how true are those stories today that her own left-wing faction wants to roll her? Well, that was certainly the line in the Australian newspaper this morning, reporting that so-called moderate MPs were about to swap their allegiance to Andrew Hastie because Sussan Ley ultimately backed dumping net zero after that exhaustive party room process. So how true is it? Well, not so accurate, my read. From the calls I've made today, there's certainly no move against her this year. And with only one sitting week left, the mechanics are that you need all the MPs in Canberra for a party room meeting to have a party room spill. Now, there's no sense that's going to happen. Indeed, we've got 1 week to go. And earlier today, you've got a couple of the key moderates out there issuing a statement of support behind Sussan Ley. But the speculation, well, that isn't helpful given the big job the Coalition has ahead of itself to go out there and explain why net zero had to go and why Labor hanging on to it is hurting people, hurting industry and hurting our country. Now, when people ask me, do I miss working in politics? Come on, Peter, get back into politics. In many respects, I do miss it. I certainly miss policy work, and I certainly miss feeling as though you're in a place where you're really making a difference to our country. But when I read stories like this, when I see these stories again, this is what I don't miss about politics. The fickle and the shallow MPs, backgrounding journalists, not willing to put their names to any criticism. Well, they're the kind of people who give public life a bad name, and they breed contempt for politicians. Frankly, they're the sort of weak characters, the bedwetters I call them, the bedwetters, who should be shown the door. Because to win on this whole energy debate, the Liberals must unite. They must turn their attention away from all their internal bitching and moaning and focus relentlessly and only on Labor. Now, they need to do the policy work too on their alternative. It feels a bit half-baked at the moment. And they also need to lift their energy levels and really start to get out into the community to explain and campaign. Now, it'll take time, just as it took months of relentless campaigning against the Voice to turn the tide in the polls with voters. So too it will take time to understand, for people to understand just how responsible net zero is for their increasing power bills and just how few countries in the world are actually signed up to this madness. Now, Labor think it'd be a great win if Australia gets to host next year's UN Climate Conference in Adelaide. Actually, I think it's more like a gift for the coalition. Right now, at this year's meeting in Brazil, almost 2/3 of the countries there have not provided their updated emissions targets. And almost no global leaders are attending either. Unlike the cavalcade of leaders we used to see at these UN events when the green religion was at its zenith. With wars raging in Ukraine and the Middle East and a very unpredictable China, countries want to be energy strong and prosperous now, not weak and poor. So this is the right time for Sussan Ley to campaign because it's time we in Australia woke up.